Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city. And we start. Evan looked at his watch, sitting at a table in a cozy coffee shop, and felt a little nervous. Having agreed to this blind date on the strong recommendation of a friend, he was not entirely sure that he had done the right thing. Fatigue after a day of work made itself felt, but it was too late to refuse. Sipping coffee, he nervously tapped his finger on the table and periodically glanced out the window, peering at the passers-by who hurried past. The coffee shop where they agreed to meet was one of those small, cozy establishments where it's nice to hide from the bustle of the city. The red brick walls, dim lighting, and soft jazz created an intimate atmosphere that Evan thought would help alleviate the awkwardness of the first meeting. Finally, the door opened and a girl walked in, causing Evan to instinctively sit up straighter in his chair. She was petite, even a little frail, with shoulder-length brown hair and eyes that seemed huge because of her obvious anxiety. The girl stopped on the threshold and looked around hesitantly, as if doubting whether she should go further at all. Evan stood up quickly, almost hitting the table. "Haley?" he asked, coming closer. She winced, lifting her chin slightly. "Yes, and you're probably Evan." Her voice was quiet, as if she was afraid to disturb someone. "That's right," he smiled, trying to seem as casual as possible. "Glad to finally meet you." She smiled back uncertainly and looked down. It was noticeable that Haley was embarrassed and was trying to hide it behind feigned calm. "Come in, I've already taken a table," Evan suggested softly, pointing to the side. She nodded and followed him, trying to walk as if she was afraid of disturbing someone. They sat down opposite each other, and there was a silence that seemed almost tangible. Evan was the first to break the silence. "How long have you lived in this area?" he asked lightly, hoping the neutral topic would help her relax. Haley nervously fingered the edge of the napkin. "About a year," she said quietly. "I moved from a small town. It's still unusual for me to live among so many people." "I understand. At first the city seems crazy," Evan smiled. "I moved here myself a few years ago, and it took me a long time to get used to the noise and pace of life." Haley looked up at him with interest. "And what helped you adapt?" "Well, coffee, of course," he laughed, pointing to his cup. "It's impossible to live in a big city without it." She finally smiled sincerely, and it suddenly gave her charm. Evan found himself thinking that he wanted to see that smile as often as possible. "Then maybe we can order another cup," Haley suggested, perking up slightly. "Great idea," Evan nodded approvingly and called the waiter. When they ordered, he looked at Haley again and, noticing that she was withdrawn again, decided to change tactics. "You know, I'm a little worried," he admitted, making a serious face. Haley raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Is it true? And I thought it was just me." "Just kidding, I'm terribly worried," Evan continued with a smile. "Blind dates are always so strange, don't you agree?" Haley laughed quietly and relaxed slightly. "Yes, strange, especially when you don't know what to expect." Evan took a deep breath, deciding to take a risk and add some sincerity. "But I'm glad I came, just because I met you." She blushed slightly and looked down again. "Thank you, that's nice." Gradually, they began to exchange small stories about themselves, about work, interests, funny situations they encountered. Evan noticed that Haley was slowly opening up to him more and more every minute. He caught her every word, every smile, and was surprised how such a modest and insecure girl could be so attractive. The coffee shop was gradually emptying, leaving them almost in privacy. Time flew by, and Evan suddenly realized that he didn't want to say goodbye to Haley at all. "It's late," she said quietly, looking at her watch. "We probably have to go." Evan nodded, although he didn't want to admit that the date was coming to an end. "Can I accompany you?" he suggested. She thought for a moment and then nodded timidly. "Thank you, I would be glad." They went out into the street, where the evening fog was already descending, slightly hiding the city lights. Evan felt a slight chill and, looking at Haley, noticed that she was shaking. "Cold?" he asked, taking off his jacket from his shoulders and carefully covering the girl's shoulders with it. She looked at him in surprise and smiled timidly. "Thank you, Evan." He felt a warmth spreading inside his chest and decided that this meeting was not a mistake. Evan walked next to Haley, listening to her talk quietly, and knew one thing for sure: he wanted to see her again. Evan stood on the balcony of his apartment, looking into the endless lights of the city at night, which seemed to him both calming and unbearably lonely. He remembered how he decided to go on a blind date. He had long been accustomed to loneliness after his world was broken into small pieces. 3 years ago, he considered himself the happiest man in the world. Then he was sure that his life had acquired ideal meaning. He had a girl whom he loved with all his heart. Her name was Lindsay, and she seemed to be the embodiment of all his dreams. Lindsay was bright, charismatic, and endlessly attractive. She was always the center of attention, and Evan was proud that this woman chose him. Their relationship was intense, passionate, and he was sure that he had found the one with whom he would spend the rest of his life. However, everything changed in one ordinary, unremarkable evening. He returned home earlier than usual, deciding to surprise her with dinner and flowers. Opening the apartment door, he could already hear her laughter and her voice, which sounded different than usual. But then he didn't attach any importance to it until he went into the bedroom. There he found Lindsay with another man, a man he considered his friend. His world collapsed at that very moment, and everything he believed in turned to dust. Evan tried to forget, tried to move on, but after this incident his heart seemed to close forever. Every time he met someone new, an alarming thought would arise in his head: what if this happens again? These fears prevented him from trusting and opening up. As a result, he completely isolated himself from the world, convincing himself that it would be easier this way. But his best friend, Mark, saw Evan slowly but surely sink into loneliness and apathy. He tried to somehow pull him out, make him feel the taste of life again. "You can't hide forever, Evan," Mark said over a cup of beer at the bar they frequented on Fridays. "I'm not hiding," Evan answered stubbornly, looking into his mug. "That's exactly what you're hiding. You're afraid to trust again. But not all people are the same. You have to give life another chance." Evan sighed tiredly, rejecting all his friends' attempts to pull him out of this state. He is used to believing that a quiet life without emotional turmoil is the best he can afford. But Mark didn't give up. "Listen, I have a friend. Her name is Haley. You should meet her," he said one day, looking straight into Evan's eyes. Evan laughed sarcastically. "Blind date? Are you serious? That's the last thing I want." "Yes, I'm serious. She is a good girl, modest, and even shy. Not at all like Lindsay." Mark specifically mentioned her name, knowing how painfully it would resonate in Evan's soul. "I'm not asking you to fall in love, just go and talk to her." "What do you have to lose?" Evan hesitated for a long time, his heart and mind arguing with each other. He really had nothing to lose, except perhaps the last drop of faith in people. But something in Mark's eyes, his persistence, his sincere desire to help his friend made Evan think. "Do you really think this is a good idea?" he asked doubtfully a few days later when they met again in a cafe. Mark smiled, clearly feeling that the ice began to melt. "I'm sure. Haley herself recently went through a not-so-pleasant experience, and perhaps you will find common topics of conversation. She won't put pressure on you or try to seem like someone else. Believe me, it's hard for her too." Evan thought about it, feeling genuinely curious for the first time in a long time. He understood that by moving away from the world, he did not protect himself from pain, but only locked it inside, where it slowly destroyed him. "Okay, I'll go on this date," Evan gave in, feeling strangely relieved that he had made this decision. Mark happily patted him on the shoulder. "You won't regret it, I promise." In the days that followed, Evan thought a lot about the upcoming meeting, feeling a mixture of anxiety and cautious optimism. He hoped that this girl would turn out to be an ordinary person with no ulterior motives, and that their conversation, even if it was the only one, could heal his broken heart a little. On the evening of the meeting, he spent a long time getting ready, choosing clothes that would not look too formal but also not too casual. Looking at himself in the mirror, he smiled at his reflection for the first time in a long time. "Just be yourself," he muttered under his breath, and this gave him strength. Leaving the apartment, Evan understood that despite the fear and uncertainty, he had taken the first step towards a new life. He didn't know what awaited him, but he was ready to give himself this chance. After all, sometimes it is the most unexpected encounters that can change your life. Only a few days have passed since their first meeting, but for Haley these days flew by as if in a foggy haze. She did not expect that after so much time of loneliness, she could again feel excitement and anticipation of something pleasant. After the coffee shop, where Evan and Haley got to know each other better, he texted her almost the next day. A few timid messages on social media turned into casual correspondence, and then Evan took the plunge, inviting Haley to a second meeting this time at the mall. The idea of going there seemed strange to Haley. Usually people choose some picturesque places, parks, restaurants, or cinema. But Evan suggested a shopping center, and his arguments sounded quite tempting. Just walk around, look at new collections, maybe buy something new and treat yourself. Haley couldn't argue with the fact that she hadn't updated her wardrobe in a while, and deep down in her heart she wanted to hear his opinion about what would suit her. Still, she didn't have much experience in choosing things that could highlight her natural beauty. On the appointed day, several times she caught herself looking at her watch with increasing impatience. At home, she went through all her few outfits, trying to choose something suitable. From past experience, Haley knew that loose, discreet clothes that didn't draw too much attention to her figure suited her best. But now something was changing in her thoughts. Maybe it was the conversation with Evan that awakened in her the desire to get out of her comfort zone. Finally, she settled on a simple but cute sundress in a soft blue shade. It was neat and moderately modest, but already slightly different from her usual style, not a completely shapeless thing, but still emphasizing her thin waist. Haley looked in the mirror and, although she found 100 reasons not to like herself, she still noticed the dress suited her. Thinking that it was still warm outside, but inside the shopping center the air conditioners could work at full capacity, she grabbed a light white cardigan. Having carefully combed her hair, Haley left the apartment with a slight trepidation in her soul. She still couldn't believe that someone like Evan could see something special in her. Yes, he had already told her that he thought she was sweet and interesting, but the long-standing voice of insecurity inside did not give her peace. Evan arrived at the mall ahead of schedule and had time to look around while he waited for Haley. It was a fairly large complex with many boutiques, cafes, recreation, and entertainment areas. Bright shop windows attracted visitors with various offers of discounts and new products. The hum of voices and footsteps, the echoes of music from somewhere far away, announcements of sales over the speakerphone, all this merged into a single live noise, typical of shopping centers on the weekend. He understood that Haley might feel uncomfortable in such a crowded place, so he wanted to figure out how to support her in advance. He managed to notice that a presentation of a new collection was taking place today in one of the women's clothing boutiques, where they promised to invite a stylist and consultants. Perhaps this will help her open up, Evan thought. He wanted Haley to feel beautiful and confident. From their very first date, Evan saw in her a fragile tenderness that she seemed to be trying to hide under modesty and subtle gestures. When Haley entered the mall, Evan immediately recognized her in the crowd. She stood out with her posture, a little wary, tense, as if she didn't know where to put her feet and where to put her hands. He felt something tremble in his chest with tenderness. Despite all the internal worries, she came, and she looked great. The blue sundress really suited her, its color emphasized the delicate pallor of her skin and made her eyes expressive. "Haley," he called, waving his hand at her. She turned around, smiled when she noticed him, and approached him quickly, as if afraid that in the large crowd they might get lost in each other. Evan immediately felt how tense she was, and for a moment he wanted to hug her tightly to dispel this confusion. But he understood that he couldn't afford it, yet he didn't know how she would react. "Hello," Haley said, looking into his warm gaze. "Sorry if I kept you waiting." "Not at all," Evan replied. I came early myself. They exchanged smiles and the tension eased just a little. How do you like the idea of taking a walk, maybe looking at a few shops? Evan suggested. Yeah, that's a good idea. Haley was a little embarrassed, but I don't really like crowds. I understand, Evan nodded with understanding. There are several cozy corners here where you can hide from the bulk of people if it gets too noisy. But I thought, it's high time you updated your wardrobe, huh? He said this with a slightly joking tone, but there was genuine concern in his eyes. Haley shrugged. Yes, I haven't gone shopping for a long time. I actually don't know the last time I bought something new. Well, then this is a good reason, Evan smiled. I saw that there is a promotion in one boutique today. They brought in a consultant and say they give free style advice. Free style tips. Haley was surprised, feeling embarrassment and childish curiosity awakening in her at the same time. Exactly. I thought this might help you pick up something new. What do you say? She thought for a moment, looking from Evan to the endless stream of people scurrying back and forth. On the one hand, she felt awkward at the thought of having to try on dresses and appear in them in front of strangers. On the other hand, Evan's words gave her some kind of inner warmth. He wanted her to feel more confident. It was clear in his every gesture and look. Okay, she finally agreed, trying to keep her voice firm. Great, Evan was delighted. Let's go. They moved along the wide galleries of the shopping center. Evan walked alongside, periodically pointing out interesting, in his opinion, shop windows and telling short stories about how once he was looking for a gift for his mother and almost got confused in all these sparkling stores. Haley laughed as she listened to his stories. She noticed that next to him she began to breathe easier. A feeling settled inside that he could protect her from this stream of people, from excessive attention, from everything that frightened her. Finally, they arrived at the boutique Evan was talking about. It was a modern store with a bright, but not flashy design, where soft pastel colors predominated. The showcase showed several mannequins in light, romantic dresses and suits that emphasized femininity. At the entrance stood a friendly girl seller, who, seeing the new visitors, immediately smiled. Welcome! How can I help? Evan turned to Haley and nodded, saying, Decide for yourself. Haley took a quiet breath and said, More precisely, I would like to see the dresses, maybe something more feminine, and perhaps I could use some advice. The saleswoman, who introduced herself as Rose, cordially escorted them inside. Muffled music, neatly laid out things, a pleasant aroma of perfume, all this overall created the feeling that they were in a small oasis of style. Rose immediately noticed Haley's timidity and decided to act carefully. Of course, we have a special promotion today, she said. I or our stylist can choose several looks for you based on your color type and preferences. That would be great, Evan agreed, smiling encouragingly at Haley, who was awkwardly fiddling with the edge of her purse. As Rose disappeared into the back of the store to fetch a few options, Evan noticed Haley standing with obvious concern in her eyes. Everything is fine? He asked softly. A little scary, Haley admitted. I've never tried on revealing outfits or anything like that before. Don't worry, he reassured. You don't have to buy something you don't like. Just try on different styles. Maybe you'll find something new. She nodded, struggling to contain her nervous smile. Soon Rose returned, holding in her hands several dresses of different lengths and styles, from light summer sundresses to slightly more elegant options. Let's start with these, she suggested. Haley took the dresses and went to the fitting room. Evan remained near the large mirrored wall where clients usually came out to look at themselves from the outside and perhaps consult with friends or relatives. He tried not to feel overly excited, but he couldn't deny that he was very curious to see Haley in something unusual for her. How are things there? He asked through the curtain, trying to make his voice sound friendly and not frighten her. This dress, I think it's too short, came the muffled answer. Everything is fine, Rose's more confident voice was heard. Try to just go out and look at yourself in the mirror. Haley pulled back the curtain and took a few hesitant steps forward. She wore a short pastel pink summer dress that flowed loosely from the waist, but still left her long legs exposed. Evan held his breath for a moment. He knew that Haley was insecure about her appearance, but in fact, her figure looked very harmonious. And from Rose's look, he realized that she was surprised too. "You look great," he said sincerely, trying not to overdo it with compliments. "Is it true?" Haley asked timidly. "Believe me, it's true," Rose confirmed. "You have very beautiful proportions, and this cut perfectly emphasizes your waist." Haley took a few more steps towards the large mirror. Looking at her reflection, she practically did not recognize herself. Her legs seemed long and slender, and the image itself was so feminine that she suddenly felt dizzy with the realization that she could look so attractive. "How do you feel?" Evan asked, coming closer. "It's unusual," she admitted, without taking her eyes off the mirror. "But, as if I could be different. More confident, perhaps." "Exactly." Rose clapped her hands. "Do you want to try more?" Haley nodded, still a little confused, but not so withdrawn. She found that the salesman's support and Evan's approving gaze began to melt away her fears. "Maybe I'm really being shy for nothing," she thought, returning to the fitting room. Over the next half hour, she tried on several dresses, each of which revealed a new facet of her appearance. One was more formal, dark blue, with a neat cutout that emphasized the line of the neck. Another was romantic, with light lace, and the third looked like it was made for a cocktail party, sparkling with delicate sequins. Rose helped with advice, adjusted a belt here, pointed out the correct size there, and Evan stood a little to the side so as not to embarrass Haley, but every time she came out in a new outfit, he did not skimp on sincere compliments. Gradually, Haley began to realize that she really liked some styles that she had never even considered before. She loved seeing Evan's expression change when he saw her new images. She began to smile more often and more freely, lifting her chin slightly when she looked at herself in the mirror. She liked to feel beautiful. "Of all these dresses, which one is closest to your soul?" Rose asked as they walked up to the cash register and began looking through the options. "It's hard for me to say," Haley answered. "I like this pink, but in dark blue I felt more elegant. And then there is that white one with lace." "Why not take two at once?" Evan suggested jokingly. Haley was confused. "It's too expensive, and I didn't plan to spend that much." "I can help if anything," Evan offered. "Consider it a gift." Haley shook her head. "Thank you, but that would be too much. I'll pay for it myself." Evan realized there was no point in insisting and smiled at her. She ended up choosing two dresses, the soft pink one that made her look at herself differently for the first time, and one simpler but neat one with a light floral pattern on the waist. The same saleswoman, Rose, came to the register, congratulating Haley on her new thing and saying that she was pleased to work with such a nice couple. The word couple made them both blush and smile. With their shopping in hand, Haley and Evan left the boutique and felt like they needed a little break from new experiences. "I know a good cafe here on the second floor," Evan suggested. "I'll be happy to drink something cold," Haley agreed. "I was so worried that I even sweated." They went up the escalator, and the whole time Haley was thinking about how unusual she felt. Previously, the mere mention of trying on skimpy outfits made her want to run and hide, but now she voluntarily tried on short dresses that showed off her figure. In the cafe, they took a table by the window. The shopping center spread out below like a miniature city in which everything was seething and seething with life. "How did you like today's experience?" Evan asked when they ordered. "Surprisingly, nice," Haley admitted, running her hand along the handle of the paper shopping bag. "I couldn't even imagine what it was like to feel beautiful in the eyes of others. That is, I always tried not to stick my head out, to hide in something gray and inconspicuous." "You shouldn't have done that," Evan objected softly. "You have no reason to hide. You're a very attractive girl, Haley." She felt her heart beat faster at his words. It was obvious that Evan was not saying this out of politeness, but sincerely, and this made everything turn inside her, as if the butterflies in her stomach began to restlessly flutter their wings. Maybe I wasn't able to notice it before, or I just didn't believe it, she whispered. I understand, he replied. But we are people, and sometimes we need someone else to see in us what we ourselves do not notice. At that moment, the waitress brought my order 2 glasses of iced tea and a couple of light snacks. Haley took a sip, feeling the cool sweetness of the drink pleasantly refreshing. She looked at Evan, at his kind eyes, and felt deep gratitude. In just a couple of meetings, he had already done more for her than she had managed to do for herself in many months. They talked a little about work, plans for the weekend, and how there were a few other places to see in the mall. Soon Evan suggested going down to the accessories and jewelry department to pick out something to match the new dress. Haley felt a little nervous again because she had never worn anything other than simple jewelry before. But she became interested. She understood that together with Evan, it would no longer seem scary or strange. When they reached the accessories department, Haley's eyes widened with variety. Earrings, chains, bracelets, hair clips, everything sparkled and shimmered. She timidly asked Evan's opinion, and he, although not a great expert in this matter, tried to speak tactfully. I think these little stud earrings would look great with your hair. They are very gentle and do not distract attention from your face. Haley tried on the earrings and saw in the mirror that the slight sparkle emphasized her modest sophistication. The seller, noticing such a scene, smiled knowingly. Haley caught her eye and smiled back. She felt like she was part of some wonderful moment where she was accepted and supported without trying to remake or humiliate her. Feeling that they had been wandering around the mall for too long, Evan suggested they finish shopping and take a short walk in the fresh air. Haley agreed happily. On the one hand, she did not want to leave this place in which she had just begun to feel a little more confident. On the other hand, she understood that it was important not to overdo it, so that too many impressions would fall on her at once. Going outside, they walked along a small alley near the shopping center, where young trees grew. It was already early evening when the sun was setting, and the soft light gilded everything around. Haley breathed in the air and felt a feeling of lightness and joy growing inside. She clutched the bag of her new dresses in her hands and couldn't believe she bought them. Thank you, she said quietly, stopping near a low curb where she could sit down. For what exactly? Evan came closer and sat down next to him. For helping me look at myself differently, she admitted, lowering her eyes. Because you are so real. Don't try to seem better or smarter than you are. Evan smiled. I just want you to understand that you deserve the best, and that you have more beauty and attractiveness than you think. Haley felt tears welling up in her eyes, not from sadness, but from an unfamiliar feeling of warmth and acceptance. I hope you wear those dresses more often, he said, to diffuse the emotional moment. I'll try, Haley laughed, wiping away a tear. I wish I looked confident enough in them. You're already doing it, Evan assured her. You know, when you walked out of the fitting room in that pink dress, you looked like a man who suddenly discovered that he could fly. Seriously? Haley smiled, remembering the feeling of pleasant shock and delight that she experienced when looking at herself in the mirror. Yes, it was wonderful. I think you should believe in yourself more often. Haley felt determination rise within her. She didn't want to hide behind baggy sweaters and jeans again. Of course, it is difficult to get rid of all fears at once, but this step was important for her. It was through this gradual discovery of a new self that she could learn to love herself. They sat on the curb for a few more minutes, enjoying the cool air and the rare passers-by who were hurrying in all directions. Then Evan stood up and extended his hand to her. Let's go, I'll take you with you. Let's go. Haley took his hand, and they walked towards the bus stop. Along the way they hardly spoke, as if all the important words had already been said. They walked side by side, feeling as if they had known each other for a long time. Haley marveled at how natural their intimacy had become in such a short time. When they got to Haley's house, Evan stopped at the entrance. I'm glad you decided to spend this day with me. I'm glad, too. Haley suddenly felt like she didn't want to leave. She wanted to say something else, but the words were stuck in her throat. Maybe we can call tomorrow. he suggested, just chatting without any plans. Certainly. We'll wait. They exchanged warm glances, and although there was no kiss, there was a feeling of closeness in the air, which meant much more to Haley than any random gestures. She headed towards the door, and Evan stood for another minute, looking after her, and then walked along the street lit by lanterns. Returning home, Haley carefully hung the new dresses in the closet, again running her fingers over the delicate fabric with a sinking heart. Today, for the first time in many years, she caught admiring glances and did not feel out of place. Evan's support and the salesman's concern for her taught her the main thing. Sometimes, in order to blossom, it's enough to have someone nearby who can believe in you a little earlier than you believe in yourself. She knew she still had a long way to go to achieve true confidence, but this day was an important milestone for her. Opening her laptop as a distraction before bed, Haley saw a message from Evan. "Thank you for a wonderful day. A smile suits you better than any clothes. Good night." She laughed quietly, feeling a pleasant warmth spreading inside her, and her lips forming a reciprocal smile. Several months have passed since that memorable walk through the shopping center when Haley first gave herself the courage to try on dresses that emphasized her figure. And during this time, a lot has changed in her life. She still remained fragile, tender, but gradually learned to accept and reveal the beauty and energy that always lived inside her, but which she carefully hid for many years. It all started with little things. At first, Haley became a little bolder in her selection of casual clothes. She carefully expanded her wardrobe, adding those dresses from the mall and pairing them with neat cardigans or elegant sandals. It was still unusual for her to catch the admiring glances of others, but next to her was Evan, who sincerely rejoiced at her every success and supported her in every possible way. The relationship itself between Haley and Evan developed gradually, without sudden leaps, but with a special depth of understanding of each other. Each of them carried their own wounds and fears in their hearts, and each found in the other a person with whom it was safe to overcome these fears. During their evening walks and conversations over tea, it became increasingly obvious that real intimacy was emerging between them. And one ordinary evening, returning from work together, they seemed to by default come to the conclusion that they were now a couple. This was not a pompous official recognition. Rather, they both simply felt that their attraction had grown into something more than timid dates. They began to spend nights at each other's houses more often, prepare breakfasts together, and make plans for the weekend. It became obvious to those around them that they were together because there was some kind of special warmth in their looks at each other. Some friends smiled, noticing how suitable they were for each other. Others looked with curiosity, trying to understand the secret of this quiet but deep connection. For Haley, a period of internal change has begun. She recalled that she once enrolled in a marketing course, but dropped out, being sure that she wouldn't succeed. Now, inspired by Evan's support, she decided to return to her dream. In the evenings, she began studying articles, watching webinars, listening to podcasts on modern promotion strategies and advertising. Previously, she was stopped by the fear of being rejected, of seeming funny, but now she seemed to have gained new strength. Evan, noticing her passion for learning, offered to help whenever possible. He helped her find the necessary resources, shared his thoughts on what she read, asked questions, encouraging her to delve even deeper into the topic. He easily admitted that he was not an expert in marketing, but he knew how to support. And for Haley, this was the most important thing, to feel that there was a person nearby who would not laugh at her ideas, but, on the contrary, would spur their development. After several weeks of diligent study and online courses, she learned of an opening at a small but promising marketing firm. Why not try it, she thought, for the first time, feeling that she was ready to take a risk. Of course, she shared this news with Evan. He literally blossomed when he heard that Haley wanted to move forward and persistently convinced her not to give up under any circumstances. "But I'm afraid that I won't pass the interview," Haley admitted, sitting at her laptop in the evening and rereading the requirements for the position. "If you don't even try, you won't know for sure," Evan objected. "You have already invested so much time and effort into your development. Few people are as persistent as you. I believe that you will succeed." His faith inspired him, and Haley decided to send her resume. Surprisingly, she was almost immediately invited for an interview, and then one more. A few days later, they called her and said that they were glad to welcome her to the team as a junior marketer. The work turned out to be an exciting challenge for Haley. Her new office was located in a modern business center. Spacious glass meeting rooms, computers everywhere running the latest applications. The team was young and energetic. Initially, Haley felt awkward because everyone around her seemed so advanced and confident, and she was still struggling with the remnants of her internal complexes. But her efforts and thirst to learn did not go unnoticed. The manager, giving her the first task, was pleasantly surprised when Haley provided a small market study with very clear observations and suggestions for improving the strategy. "You have great potential," the manager told her at one of the weekly planning meetings. "Work just as hard and we'll have a reason to promote you." These words gave Haley even more confidence. She threw herself headlong into new projects. She easily agreed to additional tasks if she understood that this would allow her to expand her horizons. The colleagues were quite friendly, and some of them were willing to share their experiences. Gradually, she joined the team, participating not only in work meetings, but also in extracurricular activities, for example, gatherings in a cafe after work, where employees had the opportunity to get to know each other better. Meanwhile, the relationship with Evan also did not stand still. They are used to keeping in touch during the working day, short messages, sending funny memes or photos. In the evenings, when they found time to have dinner together, Haley shared her successes and experiences. Evan listened with genuine interest, sometimes offering good advice, although he was not an expert. But most of all, she appreciated his ability to simply listen without interrupting. Soon, Haley began to be invited to more serious work meetings, including with the company's partners. Her immediate supervisor, a woman named Audrey, saw potential in her and decided to help her blossom. "You need to work on your self-confidence," she once said in an individual meeting. "You have enough knowledge, but sometimes there is a lack of firmness in the way you present the results. People need to see that you are not afraid to speak up." Haley blushed when she heard this, but realized that Audrey meant business. Inner fear still made itself felt when she had to perform. Nevertheless, the support from colleagues and, of course, Evan did the trick. Every day she felt more and more that she was really changing. The changes in her style also did not go unnoticed. Her habit of wearing modest, discreet clothes gave way to more modern outfits. These were not vulgar images, but rather thoughtful, elegant combinations that emphasized the dignity of the figure, but remained within the framework of the business dress code. New length skirts, neat blouses, feminine accessories, all this gave her a fresh, energetic look. Colleagues noticed the changes. "Haley, you're just shining today," an office friend once told her. Did something good happen? Haley just smiled in response. A lot of good things happened. She found a goal, inspiration, and, most importantly, a person nearby who sincerely rejoiced at her successes. However, with a new look and new self-confidence, men began to treat Haley differently. If earlier at work men saw her as a quiet, inconspicuous colleague, now they began to notice her femininity and natural charm. At first it was awkward for her to catch curious glances at herself. "Are they really looking at me?" she asked herself. But then I realized, yes, they really began to notice her. Evan, observing such changes, could not help but rejoice. He saw that Haley was realizing her potential, that she was becoming more open to the world. But along with joy, a pang of jealousy began to appear inside him for the first time in a long time. He remembered well what it was like to see someone else suddenly circling next to your girlfriend, trying to attract her attention. One day, when Haley was late at work because of an urgent project and then said that a colleague would give her a ride, Evan felt a strange wave of anxiety. He felt bad that it wasn't him doing this. He tried to push these thoughts away, telling himself that it was just a friendly gesture. But images of past betrayal popped into his head, and he involuntarily began to compare. It was stupid, he understood, because Haley had not given the slightest reason for doubt. But feelings of jealousy are not always about logic. That evening, when Haley returned home, he met her at the door. "Hello," she said with a smile, seeing his concentrated face. "Sorry it's so late. We had force majeure, and then Will offered to give me a ride." She didn't have time to finish when Evan, with unusual harshness, clarified. "Who is this, Will?" "My colleague," Haley replied, frowning at his tone. "He just gave me a ride. Why didn't you warn me so that I could pick you up myself?" She was confused. "Because you were busy and I didn't want to bother you." "Yes, and it was faster." Evan was silent for a moment. He knew he was talking nonsense. Haley was not obliged to turn to him for help in every case, and she was driven by an ordinary colleague, nothing special. But he was hurt by memories of past relationships, and now he unconsciously transferred his worries to new ones. "Sorry," he said finally, pulling himself together. What are you doing?" Haley asked carefully. She saw something painful flash in his eyes. "I was just worried," he lied, not wanting to go into details. "Sorry, I shouldn't have lost my temper." Haley looked at him with compassion. She had already begun to guess that there were unhealed scars inside him. But then she didn't say anything. She just took his hand and said, "Understand, but you can trust me." Evan nodded, trying to smile, and realized that he had to deal with his feelings so as not to transfer his fears to Haley. In the following days, Haley continued to work hard, achieving greater and greater success. She participated in an important presentation for a new client, and her ideas were well received. Within the team, Haley became a real discovery, quiet and unnoticed at the beginning. She suddenly opened up, demonstrating a creative approach and the ability to manage large amounts of information. After one of these presentations, she was approached by a colleague named Ryan, who had already hinted a couple of times that he liked working with her. "She performed amazingly," he said, smiling at her. "You see, such ideas have been in the air for a long time, but only you managed to structure them so clearly." "Thank you," Haley said, embarrassed. "In fact, we all did this work together." "Well, if you want to celebrate your success, on Friday we're going to a bar near the office. You can join," Ryan suggested, looking at her with a special look. "Yes, I'll think about it," she answered, trying not to attach much importance to it. Of course, Haley was glad to have the opportunity to get to know the team better in an informal setting, but she knew that she should consult with Evan, or at least inform him. She didn't want him to worry anymore. When they met in the evening to have dinner at a small restaurant near the house, Haley mentioned her colleague's plans. "Great," Evan said, trying to sound as calm as possible. "I think you should go if you want to relax with them." "Don't you want to join?" Haley suggested, although she herself was not sure whether he would be comfortable there. "Yes, I will probably disturb you. This is, essentially, a corporate get-together," he shrugged. She detected a strange note in his voice. She didn't want to push, so she decided to just leave the invitation open. "Fine, but know that I am always glad if you are around." Evan felt confused for the next few days. On the one hand, he understood that Haley had every right to communicate with her colleagues, especially now that she had the opportunity for career growth and expanding her circle of acquaintances. On the other hand, he could not get rid of a terrible feeling of jealousy when he imagined how other men would talk to her, admire her beauty, her new successes, her smile. Friday was approaching and Haley was getting ready to go to the bar with her co-workers. She chose one of her new dresses, elegant but still in keeping with the relaxed dress code. At this time, Evan tried to act at ease, but inside everything was twisted into a tight knot. He remembered his past with Lindsay, who also first went with colleagues, and then it turned out that among the well-wishers, there was someone who entered her life much deeper. "Haley is not Lindsay," he repeated to himself, trying to calm his anxiety. And yet, when Haley was about to leave, he suddenly realized that he could not just sit at home alone and suffer from endless thoughts. "You know, I decided to go with you after all. If you don't mind," he said, trying to look calm. "Of course I don't mind." Haley smiled with relief. She herself was worried about how to explain to him that all this was harmless communication. She wanted him to see how everything really happened and get rid of unnecessary fears. So they came to the bar together. Haley's colleagues were sitting at a long table. Some were already having fun, laughing at office stories, discussing their bosses and new projects. Haley introduced Evan, calling him her boyfriend, and he felt a pleasant warmth from the way she said it, as if she was confirming for herself and for everyone that he was important in her life. Everyone received him friendly and asked him about what he was doing. Evan answered briefly but politely, trying not to turn the general conversation into a story about himself. He understood that Haley was the main star here because people knew her, not him. Ryan, the same colleague who invited Haley, sat down with them and began to vividly tell funny stories from the office. Haley got into the swing of things so quickly that she's already outperforming some of the employees. Ryan laughed. He will definitely become my boss soon. Hardly, Haley laughed. But of course, I will try. Yes, you have incredible potential. We all see it. Ryan winked at her, taking his cocktail from the table. Evan watched this exchange, and his jealousy made itself felt when he noticed how attentive Ryan was to Haley's every word. Am I really going to act like a fool now? He asked himself mentally. He took a sip of his beer, trying to remain calm. There was a struggle inside Evan between the desire to stand up and take Haley away from potential rivals, and the understanding that she was an adult who had every right to communicate with whomever she wanted. Haley felt tense. At one point, she decided to discreetly place her hand in Evan's under the table. Her gentle touch seemed to tell him, "It's okay, I'm here with you." They sat like that for about 2 hours. Haley communicated with colleagues, and Evan tried to periodically engage in dialogue in order to get rid of the feeling of alienation. At the end of the evening, he calmed down a little, seeing that Haley was not flirting with anyone, and if someone was too keen on communication, she subtly steered the conversation towards a general direction. And the colleagues were really friendly. They all saw that Haley came with her boyfriend and treated him with respect. As they walked out of the bar hand in hand, Evan felt a pleasant sense of relief. Haley smiled at him, but he himself did not know how to explain to her all the contradictory feelings that overwhelmed him that evening. Approaching the car, he stopped, turned her towards him, and gently touched her cheeks. "You know, I probably still haven't fully overcome my fear of losing you," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. Haley responded to his look with understanding. "I won't give you a reason for this, but I understand why you might feel this way. Just know that things are different here. I'm not going anywhere." He held her in his arms for a moment, feeling all his worries subside. His heart understood. She was not lying. And yet, in order to completely get rid of the ghosts of the past, he will have to work on himself. But the main thing is that he had a real reason to change and move on, because now there was Haley in his life, who was learning to love and accept herself, and was helping him learn the same. That night, after returning home, they sat in the kitchen for a long time, talking quietly and drawing out moments of intimacy. Haley was talking about her plans for the next week, about how she wanted to pitch a new idea for a marketing campaign to a major client. Evan listened, stroking her hand and nodding occasionally, interjecting a question or comment. Inside, he felt proud of her. She, who had been shy and insecure, now discussed strategic plans with ease. "I'm so happy for you," he said when Haley paused. "I like how passionate you are about your work." She smiled. "I am grateful to you for pushing me and letting me believe in myself. Without your support, I would not have decided to do all this. No, this is your merit. I just showed that you can." Haley sighed quietly, realizing that he was downplaying his role as usual. But she didn't argue, she just kissed him on the cheek. So, step by step, they built their new life, in which Haley blossomed and Evan, watching her successes, gradually healed from old wounds. Of course, not everything was perfect. Just as Haley took time to overcome her insecurities, Evan had a struggle ahead with jealousy and the fear of losing the person he loved. But together, holding hands in these difficult moments, they felt that they could cope with any difficulties. Every day brought them new sensations and impressions. They enjoyed the little things, A morning cup of coffee, a jog in the park together, short smiles in the elevator when they went down together to go about their business. Their life did not become a fairy tale overnight, but they increasingly understood that a fairy tale is something that is created gradually through trust, support, and a willingness to take care of the vulnerabilities of others. Someone I know said that sometimes the distance between two people closes especially quickly when they both see in each other something that was hidden from others. For Haley and Evan, this became true. They saw in each other the mirrors of their fears and at the same time the keys to overcoming them. To some extent, this is what made their intimacy strong and real. And although, along with Haley's growing confidence, new opportunities began to appear in her life, higher positions, invitations to other companies, expanding her social circle, she did not forget how important it was not to lose herself in this whirlwind. At family dinners with her parents, she talked about her successes and how happy she was with Evan. The parents, seeing the changes in her, could not be happier. Their daughter, who a year ago was immersed in constant doubt, now glowed with confidence and joy. But they also noticed how sometimes a certain tension appeared in Evan related to his own memories. Maybe you should talk to someone about this, Haley's mother advised her one day when she heard her talk about his rare moments of intense jealousy. Haley just nodded then, remembering that psychotherapy sometimes helps people with similar problems. But she didn't want to put pressure on Evan. She understood that he himself had to make a decision if he felt that he could not cope alone. She herself tried to show him that he was safe next to her. She reminded him of this as long as her strength and patience could suffice, and Evan responded to this concern more and more often with warm gestures. He began to say pleasant words to her more often, thanked her for her support, surprised her with small surprises that made her smile and feel loved. After all the ups and downs they'd been through together, nothing seemed more natural to Evan than asking Haley to marry him. He prepared for a long time to take this important step. He chose an elegant ring with a small but sparkling diamond and made an agreement with a restaurant where he planned to have a romantic dinner. And that evening, when everything was supposed to happen, Evan's heart was beating so loudly that he was afraid that Haley would hear him trembling. When they got to the appointed place, Haley immediately noticed that Evan was acting especially anxious. He spoke little, although he usually did not miss the chance to tell a funny story or share news. He sat opposite her, sorting through the cutlery on the table, and finally smiled, somehow shyly. "Haley, I wanted to tell you," he began. "Yes," she leaned forward, frowning slightly. "You know, during all this time next to you, I realized that." He swallowed the lump in his throat, then slowly stood up, involuntarily drawing the glances of other visitors to them. Haley followed him with her eyes in confusion, not understanding what was happening. And Evan suddenly dropped to one knee in front of her chair. "You changed my life," he said, his voice louder than he had intended. "You showed me what it means to believe again, to love again, and not to be afraid. And I want us to continue this path together." Taking the box out of his pocket, he could hardly resist a nervous smile. "Haley, will you marry me?" Haley clapped her hand to her mouth. Her eyes immediately filled with tears of happiness. Muffled exclamations of delight were heard nearby. Someone even applauded. It was hard to believe that this timid guy, once disappointed in a relationship, was now proposing to her so confidently. "Yes," she answered, feeling tears rolling down her cheeks. "Yes, of course, I agree." The rest of that evening remained in Evan and Haley's memory in a warm haze of joy. He put the ring on her finger, she smiled, touched his hand, repeating again and again, "I can't believe that all this is for real." They left the restaurant, hugging each other, amid flashes of admiring glances from the customers, feeling that now their connection was only growing stronger. The wedding was not lavish, but it was exactly what Haley wanted. Cozy, with lots of flowers, her closest friends and relatives. Only a few months passed from the moment of the proposal, and during this time they managed to live in a new luxurious apartment in the city center, which together they furnished to their liking. Thanks to their career successes and progress at work, both were now valued and paid decently, which allowed them to plan for the future without any problems. Everything looked almost perfect at the wedding ceremony. The bridesmaids chirped around Haley, helping her adjust her veil, blush on her cheeks, and neatly style her hair. Haley, in a long white dress, seemed touchingly beautiful, and the whole audience held their breath as she appeared next to her father to walk down the aisle. Evan, standing at the altar, was as excited as a teenager proposing his first hand to a girl at a dance. He looked at Haley and his heart sank. Not so long ago, he was afraid of new relationships, afraid that he would be betrayed again. And now he was preparing to say his wedding vows in front of hundreds of guests. "We have come a long way," he began, under the gaze of friends and family, "to understand what love and trust mean. Haley, you gave me a second chance at happiness. I promise to protect you and our love, support all your ideas and endeavors, and show every day how important you are to me." Haley, listening to these words, could hardly hold back her tears. Gathering her strength, she answered with a trembling voice, "Evan, when I first started to understand you, I couldn't believe we were so close. Thank you for teaching me to feel beautiful and confident. I promise to always be there, support you in your dreams and fears, and go together towards any goals that we set for ourselves." Then the long-awaited moment came. They exchanged rings and kissed to loud applause. This was probably the happiest moment in their lives, when all the doubts and shadows of the past disappeared, giving way to the bright light of new hopes. After painting and a gala dinner, they flew off for their honeymoon to a beautiful country with a warm climate and fabulous beaches. Haley could not hide her delight when they found themselves in a hotel located on the very border with the ocean, where snow-white sand was washed by calm turquoise waves. It was like a heavenly place, and they enjoyed their time swimming, walking, and trying exotic dishes. However, Evan quickly noticed a change in Haley's behavior. She seemed to feel some kind of emotional uplift, euphoria after the wedding and all the achievements. She laughed louder and more often, and sometimes flirted with those who met on their way. Evan, accustomed to her more reserved and shy character, at first was even glad that she had become freer and more relaxed. But soon a strange uneasiness arose in him. One day, when they were sitting at a bar on the beach, drinking cool cocktails to the sound of the ocean, a young waiter approached them to take their order. Haley caught his eye and suddenly, laughing, responded to his smile with a very flirtatious phrase. Evan frowned as he felt a wave of jealousy begin to rise within him. He remembered their past conversations about how he himself was afraid and suspected that someone might take his girlfriend, and now these thoughts have made themselves felt again. "Honey, is everything okay?" he asked when the waiter walked away. "You're so funny today." "Sorry if I offended you," Haley smiled, taking a small sip from her glass. "I just feel so good here. Sometimes I want to chat and laugh with everyone around me." Evan sighed, trying not to show unnecessary emotions. "I understand, but maybe you shouldn't flirt so openly." Haley raised her eyebrows in surprise. "I'm not flirting, this is just a fun conversation." He realized that he was ready to get himself into trouble if he started pointing out her behavior now. Indeed, perhaps she is just friendly, and he still has too strong memories of his past betrayal. He just nodded and moved the conversation to another topic, but the feeling of vague uneasiness remained. Every day, Haley continued to behave more freely, enjoying the attention of those around her, especially the smiling young waiters and other vacationers. She never gave any reason to think that she would go beyond petty flirting, but the very fact that she flirted easily made Evan's heart clench. "Maybe it seems to you that this is harmless," he tried to explain his experiences when one evening they were left alone in the room. "But bad thoughts immediately pop up in my head. It started exactly the same way last time." "Evan, stop it," Haley snapped. She said this with a calm look, but there was a stab of resentment in her voice. Evan knew he had touched something important. He did not want to repeat his mistakes and destroy what they had built with such love. All he could do was sit next to her, take her hand, and try to talk more softly. "Sorry, it's just my jealousy. Sometimes I can't control it." Haley sighed, looking towards the wide window, where the warm light of the moon could be seen over the ocean. "And I have to adapt to your jealousy all the time." It seemed to me that we had already passed the stage when you are afraid that I will repeat everything. I'm trying really, but I don't want to control you or tell you how to behave. It's just that sometimes, when I see how easily you change with strangers, I get scared. She turned to him and, seeing the confusion and guilt in his eyes, softened. Sorry, I don't want you to feel bad. I guess I'm really overdoing it, but for some reason I really want lightness. After everything I've been through, I want to feel like I'm noticed, that I can be more than just a shy girl. Evan nodded, understanding her feelings. I understand. Let's just find a balance, he suggested. You can be anything, flirty, confident, bold. I love you because you are free in your manifestation. But please don't cross the line when it seems to me that I'm suddenly becoming superfluous. Okay, I'll try, Haley said quietly, and he heard reconciliation in her tone. They hugged, letting the tension dissipate. Perhaps this was not the final point in their dispute, but a step towards understanding each other. The honeymoon continued, and Evan and Haley tried to find a compromise in communicating with others. She respected his feelings, and he fought not to suspect her without reason. Sometimes they still caught themselves with a spark of jealousy or annoyance flaring up in their souls, but both tried to extinguish it in the bud with conversations and hugs. During this time, they visited several romantic excursions, sailed on a yacht, watched dolphins, and even dared to try diving. Haley, who had never been an adrenaline junkie, felt good about trusting Evan in this new activity. He was always there when she was worried, squeezing her hand in the water or helping her sort out her equipment. In the evenings, returning to their room, they realized again and again that they had become a family. Their wedding rings lay nearby, which they only took off to sleep, and this symbol of a strong connection gave them a feeling of comfort, despite any small misunderstandings. On one of the last evenings before leaving, while dining at a restaurant on the beach, they looked at the setting sun, which plunged into the ocean, painting the sky with orange and pink hues. Haley, leaning on Evan's shoulder, said quietly, "It all seems so unreal. You and I are in this paradise, married, and we have our whole lives ahead of us." Evan looked around her face, where the sunset was reflected. "It really is a bit like a dream. But it seems to me that everything is just beginning." She smiled, remembering how many tests they had already had and how much they had passed. Yes, there may be new difficulties ahead, but they have already learned to talk to each other, learn and change. We'll return home, and work, problems, decisions will await us. Haley continued, "But now I know that we can handle it." Evan gently kissed her temple, and they sat for a long time in the twilight of the approaching night, listening to the music of the waves. Inside, both had confidence. Yes, sometimes they will argue and quarrel, sometimes it will be painful, and sometimes misunderstandings or fears from the past will arise, but now each of them will do everything so as not to repeat past mistakes. The honeymoon was not only a holiday for them, but also a small test of trust, and as long as they were both ready to support each other, they could cope with this test. Several months have passed since their return from their honeymoon. Time seemed to flow smoothly and calmly. Haley threw herself back into work. She was preparing for new projects and even negotiating a possible promotion. Evan, as before, supported her in all her endeavors, although sometimes he noticed that she had become more distant. He chalked it up to stress and a busy schedule. Their life together, at first glance, continued to be harmonious. In the evenings, they recounted to each other the events of the day, discussed the little things of everyday life, and made plans for the weekend. However, Haley increasingly began to have extracurricular activities related to her work. The company where she worked was actively developing, and her colleagues were constantly organizing friendly meetings, corporate team building events, and sometimes noisy parties designed to strengthen the team spirit. Haley herself told Evan about these meetings with a twinkle in her eyes, as if she liked such a riotous and vibrant atmosphere. Evan noticed more than once that she returned home smelling of alcohol or perfume, which was unusual for her before. He tried to treat this with understanding. She is young, she enjoys the results of her work, she is recognized, success and freedom come to her. He reassured himself. On Friday evening, while Evan was still on his way home from work, Haley called him and said in an excited voice, "A corporate party awaits us in a new bar in the city center. It's a big party to celebrate the completion of a major project. Come too, after all, we are a family now, and I want to share the joy." Evan felt mixed emotions. On the one hand, he was glad that Haley invited him into her world and was no longer embarrassed to show it to his colleagues. On the other hand, he was afraid to see the same easy flirting and emancipation that so excited him back on his honeymoon. But Haley's voice sounded so cheerful that he did not dare to object. "Okay," he answered briefly, and her joyful laugh was heard in the receiver. "Great, see you there," Haley said, and quickly said goodbye. The bar where the corporate party took place had a fashionable interior. Neon lighting, loud music, high tables for guests, and a spacious dance floor, where someone was already dancing to the fiery rhythms of the DJ. When Evan entered, he immediately heard a high-pitched roar of voices and laughter, mixed with the bass of the music that beat in his chest. He found Haley almost immediately. She was the center of attention, laughing and beautiful, in a short, tight dress in a deep shade of red. Her hair was neatly styled, and there was a bold gloss of lipstick on her lips. Just the sight of her took Evan's breath away. She was so seductive. But along with admiration came an alarming feeling that Haley was changing faster than he could understand. When Haley noticed Evan, she smiled brightly at him and waved her hand, beckoning him to her. He walked over, and she leaned over to kiss his cheek, but she did it as if on impulse. Nearby stood a group of her colleagues, 2 guys and a girl, who were already in high spirits. "Evan," Haley exclaimed, "how great it is that you came. Meet Louis, Mark, and Anne. We worked on a project together." Evan greeted me politely. Louis, a tall and striking man with dark hair, immediately winked at Evan. "Nice to meet you. We were just discussing that your dear wife has some good ideas. She is almost in the leading creative position in the company." "Yes, Haley is really very talented," Evan agreed shyly, feeling an unusual pang of pride and jealousy at the same time. The man spoke about his wife with some special admiration. Anne intervened in the conversation, slightly staggering from drinking. "Oh, don't be embarrassed, Evan. We're all our own here. Have a drink with us and relax." "Yes, of course," he smiled, trying to seem casual. "I just arrived, so I need to look around." Haley, like an experienced bar guide, led him to the counter, saying as she walked, "Come on, I'll order you something light so that you can enter our atmosphere." Evan nodded without objecting. He felt almost at ease, as if he had dived into a stormy sea. Dancing people scurried around, colored lights flashed, and Haley seemed to dissolve in this chaos, charged with the energy of what was happening. At the bar, she ordered another cocktail for herself and a whiskey on the rocks for Evan. When the drinks were ready, she blinked her glass against his glass, without looking away from her defiant gaze. "Well, here's to success." "To success," he repeated quietly. She took a sip of her cocktail and, licking her lips, suddenly winked at him. "You know, I always wanted to be confident in myself, to be noticeable. I love catching those looks." Evan took a sip of whiskey, feeling his heart clench. "It's normal. I just—" He hesitated, not knowing how to articulate what he was feeling. He understood that he could not stop her from loving attention, but he himself could not completely get rid of anxiety. Haley smiled, and there was a hint of mockery in her tone. "Relax. I love you, okay? But that doesn't mean I can't have fun." Having said this, she leaned down to give him a quick kiss on the lips, and then disappeared into the crowd, carried away by her friends to the dance floor. Evan remained standing at the counter, tasting her lipstick and his own helplessness. He peered into the circle of dancers, trying to see where she was. When her figure finally reappeared, he noticed that her movements had become even more relaxed, and a man was circling next to her with a smile from ear to ear. Time passed, the music sounded louder, and the bar filled with alcohol fumes and the smell of cheap perfume. Evan tried to give himself a just relax attitude, drank a little more, and talked to a few people who were happy to chat about work, the weather, or the football game. But out of the corner of his eye, he kept watching Haley. She obviously managed to drink quite a bit. At first, she returned to him, excited, quickly whispering something in his ear about a cool party and let's go dancing. But Evan didn't have time to react before someone called out to her, and she ran away again. After a couple of hours, the atmosphere became almost uncontrollable. Some people climbed onto the tables, dancing to the whistles and applause of those present. Haley found herself in the thick of this party. Spurred on by cries of, "Come on, baby!" she perched herself on the table, feeling like the queen of the holiday. The music sounded deafening, and her body moved to the beat of the bass, captivating the gaze of the men below. Evan made his way through the crowd, trying to get his wife's attention. "Haley, get out of there. It's already dangerous." But at that moment, she threw her head back. Her hair flew up, and she just laughed loudly in response, waving her hand, saying that everything was fine. Her dress rode up above her hips, revealing her long legs. The eyes around her were focused on her. She clearly liked this kind of attention. Lewis, who appeared out of nowhere, sat down next to Evan and patted him on the shoulder. "Relax, guy. We're all just relaxing here. Your wife is the star of tonight." Evan wanted to say something in response, but couldn't find the words. Everything was raging inside him: jealousy, fear, anger, and powerlessness. He saw Haley continue to dance, while men around her shouted lewd compliments, some even stretched out their hands to her. A few minutes later, she jumped off this makeshift podium, reeling from alcohol, and headed towards the bar on the arm of some stranger. Evan rushed after her, but the crowd blocked the way, and while he was making his way through the dense rows of dancers, he lost sight of Haley and her companion. Finding a break at the bar, he looked around. A completely different bartender was standing behind it, and there was no sign of Haley. "Damn," he swore under his breath, feeling panic rolling in like a wave. He realized that something had happened that he had been afraid of all his life. Haley, in the company of an unfamiliar man, had disappeared to an unknown location. He began to walk around the room, looking into secluded corners, including secluded rooms and the smoking room, which was located on the other side of the bar. People continued to have fun. Some familiar faces tried to strike up a conversation with him, but he pushed everyone away except for desperate questions. "Have you seen Haley?" Someone shrugged. "It seems she went outside." Someone didn't know anything. Running outside, he looked around the busy street, illuminated by city lights. Several taxis were standing by the side of the road, and several men and women in club attire were smoking at a distance. However, Haley was nowhere to be found. Evan felt the ground disappear from under his feet. His heart was beating at a crazy pace. He started calling her on her mobile phone, but the phone did not answer. Perhaps she turned off the sound or completely lost her phone. The darkest scenarios were spinning in my head. But most of all, he was frightened by the feeling of betrayal. Did she really just leave with someone else? Is this really how it all ends? Almost half an hour passed and Haley didn't show up. Evan returned to the bar, hoping that she might have been found, but she continued to remain unknown. In the end, unable to withstand the intensity of emotions, he, exhausted, decided to go home. Maybe she's already there, or... In the taxi, as he clutched the phone in his hands, endlessly dialing her number, images flashed before his eyes. Their wedding ceremony, how she promised to be faithful and respect his feelings, her smile on their honeymoon, when they vowed never to repeat the mistakes of the past. And now he was traveling alone, without her, feeling abandoned. Arriving home, he found an empty apartment. No one met him at the threshold. No one turned on the light in the corridor. A feeling of loneliness covered him, and, unable to find peace, he sat down on the sofa and stared at one point. From time to time, he jumped up, hoping to hear the sound of the door opening, but there was silence all around. Time passed painfully slowly. He sat there for several hours, struggling with pain and anger in his soul. His eyes began to droop in the morning, but Evan couldn't relax until he found out what happened to Haley. Even fear for her safety was mixed with resentment and anger, which part of him suffered more, he could not understand. When the clock showed about 5 in the morning, the keys were heard fumbling in the lock. Evan jumped up immediately, his heart pounding in his throat. The door opened and Haley was carried into the apartment. More precisely, she almost collapsed, barely able to stand. Her hair was disheveled, the remnants of her makeup were smeared on her face, and she reeked of alcohol. Where, where were you? Evan exclaimed, forgetting all control over his voice. I was going crazy with anxiety. Haley, staggering, tried to take off her shoes, but only dropped one of them, hitting the floor loudly. Then she looked at Evan with a confused look. I felt bad there. I went out to some kind of nonsense. She muttered, unable to put together an articulate phrase. Who did you leave with? He came closer, feeling indignation seething inside him. Haley raised her eyebrows as if she didn't understand the question. I don't remember. Some guy. We just want to talk. Oh, my head is spinning. She staggered and almost fell. Evan, although filled with anger, instinctively caught her so that she would not get hurt. A heavy sigh escaped her throat, and she went limp in his arms. Do you even understand how I felt? He repeated in a quieter but broken tone. You don't, was all she could squeeze out, and the next moment she vomited on the floor. Evan, grimacing with disgust, helped her get to the bathroom. All he could do was hold her hair while she was throwing up inside out from a mixture of alcohol and nerves. When the attack ended, he helped her sit on the floor near the bathroom and brought her water. One thought was spinning in his head. My wife is in such a state, and I don't even know what happened to her last night. Exhausted, she bowed her head to the wall and closed her eyes. At that moment, she resembled a broken doll, no former shine, no confidence, only smudged lipstick and dull eyes. I feel so bad, she whispered. Evan, although seething with indignation, could not leave her in this state. He carefully helped her up and led her to the bedroom. There she almost immediately collapsed on the bed, lost in a heavy sleep. He covered her with a blanket and brushed an unruly strand of hair from her face, involuntarily pausing for a second. When she slept, she seemed so defenseless, almost like before, when she did not have this mask of courage and insolence. But now he could not turn away from reality. She left with a stranger, leaving him alone in the bar with his fears. She didn't answer the phone, came back in the morning completely drunk, and what exactly happened during that period he could only guess. His mind raced, trying to find some logical explanation. Maybe she wanted to annoy me, test my jealousy, or did she really do something stupid? Once he was sure she was asleep, Evan left the bedroom, closing the door. The morning light was already sliding across the furniture, drawing long shadows. He walked into the living room, where her shoe and marks from the fact that she could not hold back the drink were still on the floor. He didn't even have the strength to clean up all this mess. He sat down on the sofa, closed his eyes, and exhaled, trying to suppress the urge to burst into tears or break something in rage. He couldn't believe it had come to this. It was as if a dark shadow had fallen over their recent happiness. Just recently, he looked at Haley and saw tenderness and warmth in her, and saw a woman who had learned to love herself and him. But this night pulled the rug from under his feet. The morning found them both in a state far from the happy harmony to which they had become accustomed during their relationship. Evan spent the night practically without sleep, endlessly replaying in his head the events that happened in the bar and after it. Haley, on the contrary, fell into a restless, heavy sleep, where reality left her no strength to realize what had happened. Only in the morning did the dream fade into oblivion, and a few hours later she woke up with a splitting headache. When Haley woke up, her first feeling was a sharp burning sensation in her temples. Painful waves pulsed, causing nausea. Trying to sit up on the bed, she felt as if her body was filled with lead. The room was filled with darkness and silence, broken only by her own intermittent breathing. Where am I? What even happened? These questions arose in her head before she remembered where and with whom she went the day before. She ran her hand through her hair and felt the glued strands. There was a bitter taste of fumes in the air. Trying to focus, Haley felt something pop up in her memory. The club, the music, the bar, dancing on the table. Then her heart sank when she remembered how she jumped off the table and went somewhere with an unfamiliar man. This is where the memories ended. What did I do? Where did I go? Where was Evan? She was overcome with anxiety. The realization of helplessness in my own memory made it even worse. Gathering her will into a fist, Haley got out of bed and, staggering, went out into the corridor. The apartment was eerily quiet. In the living room, she noticed a mess. Her shoe was lying near the chair, and the carpet had a strange stain that clearly had not been there before. When she remembered how she vomited, everything inside went cold. "Evan?" she called in a hoarse voice, looking around. My heart was pounding in my throat with fear. What if he left? And how could she even blame him if everything happened through her fault? She found him in the kitchen. He sat at the table with an already cooled mug of coffee in front of him and an absent gaze directed somewhere into space. When she appeared, he seemed to come out of a trance, looking up at her with eyes red from fatigue. They looked at each other in silence for a few moments, and the tension in the air was almost palpable. "Hello," Haley said quietly, feeling shame and longing for awakening in the depths of her soul. "I'm so sorry, Evan. I remember almost nothing." Evan sighed heavily, looking down at the mug. "You left the bar with some guy, turned off your phone. I didn't know what to think and returned home, and you came in the morning, in a terrible state." Hearing his words, Haley felt her throat tighten. She took a hesitant step towards him. "Honestly, I don't understand what happened. I only remember that we were having fun, I was dancing. Yes, I drank a lot, I was terribly drunk, but consciously I would. I would never leave with a stranger just like that." Evan stood up, putting away his chair, and noticed that he seemed unusually calm, not in the sense of peace, but rather scorched from the inside, as if he had spent all his emotions overnight. "You know, I don't think it was intentional on your part," he said finally. "But that doesn't make it any easier for me. I racked my brain all night trying to figure out why this was. And where are we going anyway?" Haley lowered her eyes, not daring to approach. She understood that he had the right to be angry, offended, angry, and to any reaction. Only fragments of the night emerged in my memory, completely uncontrollable. She didn't want to believe that she could behave like that, but the facts spoke for themselves. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, realizing that this was too little to make amends. "I don't know what happened. It's just that suddenly I was captured by this feeling of freedom and fun. I wanted to prove to myself that I could be bright, brave. But I didn't want to hurt you." Evan looked at her with a bitter smile. "Haley, I believe you didn't do it on purpose. But that doesn't change how I feel now. I sat here wondering if the story I had experienced before was repeating itself." He didn't finish, but Haley understood what he was talking about. His past experiences of betrayal still echoed through their relationship. She felt how everything inside her was shrinking with guilt and pity for him. "Maybe we should talk more openly," she suggested. "Let's sit down. I'll make you some fresh coffee. I want to remember everything and explain myself." Evan was silent for a long time, seeming to consider her words, and then nodded reluctantly. While she mechanically changed the filter in the coffee maker and poured in the beans, he watched her from the threshold of the kitchen, still tense, but no longer as distant as in the morning. As the coffee maker hissed, releasing the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, Haley turned around, meeting his gaze. "I really don't remember anything about what happened after the dance. Perhaps someone treated me to 2 strong cocktails, or I got too carried away. But I wasn't trying to run away from you or hurt you." Her voice trembled. "Please believe me." "I believe," Evan said, "and that's what scares me. You get so carried away that you lose control. Don't you see how dangerous this is?" Haley didn't know what to answer. She herself realized how reckless it was, but where did this craving for carelessness come from? It always seemed to her that she did not love, did not live through some important period in her youth, and now, when she had changed so much, this thirst for freedom broke through in her. She handed Evan a mug, and they sat down at the table. The silence was heavy, but they both understood that a conversation was needed. Haley was the first to find the strength to continue. I don't want this to continue. If I could, I would turn back time and not drink so much. I know words won't solve anything, but let's try to sort this out. Evan shook his head. I also don't want to ruin our lives because of one, albeit serious, mistake. I love you, but I really don't know how to proceed. You need to understand why you allow yourself to go on such a spree. They took a few sips of coffee. The bitterness of the drink seemed to reflect the bitterness of the situation in which they found themselves. Sometimes I feel like I don't want to go back to being the quiet person I was before, Haley admitted. During this time, a lot of things have changed for me. A new job, confidence, the attention of other people. Maybe I'm going too far, but she fell silent, unable to find words to describe the internal struggle that was going on in her soul. On the one hand, she loved Evan. On the other, she didn't want to hide in the shadows again, and the new sensations of success and attention were more intoxicating than the most expensive alcohol. I understand your fear of going back, Evan said quietly, looking into her eyes. But there's a difference between being a confident woman and driving yourself unconscious and disappearing with a stranger. Haley felt herself blushing with shame and pain. Yes, you are right. I'm ready to work on myself so that this doesn't happen again. Okay, he nodded. And yet. Here he swallowed, and his gaze became harder. Can you assure me that there was nothing between you and that stranger that night? Haley lowered her eyes. I don't remember anything, honestly, but I feel with all my heart that I wouldn't do something like that. Evan sighed, realizing that this answer did not give him 100% clarity, but he did not have the strength or desire to continue the painful interrogation. He nodded slowly. Please believe me, she asked with a break in her voice. I will do everything to not give you any reason to doubt my love. I hated myself for hurting you. Evan tapped his fingers on the table as if searching for words. I believe you. But now the two of us will have to live with this suspicion if suddenly your memory never returns. Hopefully with time it will fade away and I can actually stop thinking about it. They exchanged a long glance in which fatigue was visible, but also a faint spark of hope for understanding. Haley drained her mug, feeling the hot coffee warm her stomach, but leaving her soul cold and empty. For several days, a tense calm reigned in their lives. They tried to behave as if they could continue their usual routine, have breakfast together in the morning, run off to their jobs, return in the evening, and ask each other how the day went. But both understood. Something had changed radically, and there was no return to the previous naive, trusting harmony. Evan noticed that Haley was staying in the office more and more often. She came home tired and said that in the coming weeks they had a major campaign, and they had to work in emergency mode. He tried to believe that this was the truth, because she had been delayed by projects before. But the restless worm inside wouldn't give me peace. What if she's just looking for an excuse not to be around, or in company with someone, or does he go into wild life to forget himself? One evening, when Haley came home again long after midnight, Evan met her in the hallway, sitting in the semi-darkness. He wanted to talk, but seeing her tired, haggard appearance and hearing her confused apologies, he remained silent. She was clearly not drunk, only exhausted. She muttered that she was in a meeting, then stayed late to finish a report, and then missed the early bus. Looking at her tired face, he did not make a scene. The next day, he thought about coming to her office with a surprise, like coffee and dessert, to show support and check on how things were going. But then he pulled himself together. It would look like distrust or surveillance. He did not want to become a jealous man, pursuing his wife at every turn. However, the tension that arose after the ill-fated night did not disappear. Haley tried to act as usual, smile at Evan, ask about his business, and even suggest a weekend together, but sometimes there was an alarming note in her smile. They both understood trust is a fragile thing, and the key to it is in everyone's hands. From the outside, it may seem like they are trying to sweep the situation under the rug, but in reality, they were both looking for a way to come to peace. Evan wanted Haley to return to that feeling of secure closeness that they had, and Haley desperately hoped that through her actions and sincerity, she could prove her devotion to him. But whenever they were alone, the topic of her nightly disappearance seemed to stand between them as a silent reproach. Soon, Haley had a big presentation coming up in her office to management and potential investors, and she announced to Evan that she would be coming in late for the next week. Evan nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. He took upon himself the organization of everyday life. He bought groceries, prepared dinners, but often ate alone. He again remembered his past relationship, where he also felt forgotten and unnecessary, although now he understood that Haley was not indifferent to him. One evening, unable to bear it, he decided to call her via video link to at least see her face, to make sure that she was really in the office and not in a bar or somewhere else. Haley answered the call immediately, showing him on the screen a meeting room filled with papers, schedules, and empty coffee cups. "Look, we're all like zombies here," she said half-jokingly, turning the camera, and Evan saw tired colleagues who waved to him. "I see," he said, smiling with relief. "Will you finish soon?" "Probably another hour and a half," she sighed. "But tomorrow is the defense, so I really can't leave." "Fine, I'll be waiting for you at home. I saved you your favorite pie," he added, trying to show that everything was okay. She smiled gratefully, and at that moment he again saw in her the Haley who was so dear to him, sincere, vulnerable, and gentle. Or maybe all this partying and drinking was just a side effect of the internal pressure she felt. After finishing the conversation, Evan felt some of the accumulated anxiety leave him. Of course, doubts still lived in his heart, but he did everything possible to overcome them. Besides, he had enough work worries of his own, and he tried not to get hung up on thoughts about where Haley was and with whom. But in the following days, it was precisely this ambiguity that became their forced norm. Haley returned late, he greeted her with short hugs, and tried not to ask unnecessary questions that would again cause a storm of resentment and omissions. He felt like he was balancing on a fine line. If he only put a little pressure, everything could collapse. So a busy week passed, at the end of which Haley had her long-awaited presentation. When she returned home afterward, still in high spirits, he decided to gently ask, "How did it go?" She smiled, leaning back on the sofa. "Perfect. Investors liked our ideas, and management seemed pleased. I'm happy for you," Evan said sincerely, leaning down to kiss her temple. "Maybe we should celebrate this." Haley thought for a moment, as if she wanted to suggest going out somewhere, but noticed his wary gaze and realized that both were not yet ready for new collective holidays. "Let's just cook a delicious dinner together and watch something light," she suggested. "I want to be at home with you." Evan suddenly felt a pleasant warmth inside. "Sounds great." They began to cook, trying to joke, thrusting pieces of vegetables and cheese at each other, slowly regaining the ease they once had. It seemed that they were taking small steps towards each other, not ignoring, but not savoring what happened in the past. However, there was still caution in every gesture. As they sat on the couch later, immersed in a comedy, Haley leaned against Evan's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her waist. They both seemed eager to return to each other's safety, but as soon as she moved a little or stood up, a shadow of suspicion again appeared in Evan's eyes. Time passed, and the tense silence in the relationship between Evan and Haley became more and more like a frozen thunderstorm that was ready to break out at any minute. They haven't talked openly about their feelings for a long time, yet neither he nor she could imagine how quickly their world would be turned upside down. One day, Evan returned from work to find Haley in the hallway, pacing back and forth with a cell phone in her hand. She spoke over it in a muffled whisper, but, noticing his appearance, she abruptly ended the conversation. "Who was it?" Evan asked, trying to sound calmer than he felt. "For work," Haley said, avoiding his gaze. In recent days, Evan has increasingly noticed that Haley's calls are becoming more frequent and longer. When he tried to clarify something, she nervously cut off the topic or avoided answering. And one day, he accidentally heard the name Trace among her fragmentary phrases. This name had never come up in their conversations before, and alarm bells rang inside Evan. However, the whole truth did not come out through telephone conversations. One evening, when Haley forgot a folder with documents on the table in the living room, Evan was trying to collect the scattered papers and came across an envelope with a photograph enclosed in it. In it, Haley stood next to a tall, stately man in an expensive suit, her hand casually placed on his shoulder. Judging by the scenery, it was some kind of social event, and the smiles of both of them spoke of a much greater closeness than just a business contact. On the back of the photo, in marker, was written Trace and Haley, the best start to a winning campaign, with several hearts attached next to it. Evan felt his insides clench with pain and rage, and although he understood that he had no moral right to rummage through other people's papers, the photograph seemed to jump into his hands. She confirmed her worst fears. Haley was having an affair with her boss, Trace Holden. When Haley returned home, the apartment was in an ominous twilight. The only light in the living room was the table lamp, illuminating the photograph Evan had placed on the coffee table. He sat next to her, clutching a glass of whiskey in his hands. "Who is this?" he asked, looking towards the picture as Haley entered. Her face instantly lost color. She froze in place, looking at the photo in disbelief. "Evan, you don't understand. So explain," he suggested coldly. "Explain why your boss touches you in the picture, the way only a husband should touch you." She nervously ran her hand through her hair. Her eyes darted around frantically, trying to find the words. "It's not what you think." "Seriously?" Evan looked up at her with a mixture of pain and hatred. "Then tell me, what is it?" Haley tried to say something else, but the words wouldn't come out. She felt that excuses were pointless. In recent weeks, she really began a whirlwind romance with Trace Holden, a man who surrounded her with attention and gave her a feeling of dizzying freedom. Her relationship with Evan was on the rocks, and she couldn't resist the dark allure of quick success and the admiring glances of a powerful man. "I," was all she squeezed out. "Sorry." These words were enough to cause an explosion of feelings in Evan. He jumped up from his seat, feeling his head throbbing with rage. "So I'm not crazy. My fears were not unfounded. You cheated on me while I tried to trust you again." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. "Yes, I couldn't. The shadow of the affair with Trace lay too openly on her." "Leave," Evan almost shouted, not giving her a chance to justify herself. "Evan." Haley tried to come closer, but he pulled back sharply. "I said go away," he repeated more quietly, but with such pain that she did not have the courage to object. In the corridor, she silently grabbed her things, and a few minutes later, the sound of a door slamming came from the apartment. Evan looked at the door, petrified, as if expecting it to open again. But behind her, there was only emptiness. Haley moved in with Trace. The life she began to lead under his patronage was alien and far from quiet dinners and watching movies with Evan. She was noticed in the press. Photo reports from high-profile parties, selfies on the red carpet, noisy restaurants, all this became Haley's everyday life in her new status as the favorite of an ambitious marketing director. His ex-wife looked at Evan from newspapers and tabloids, sparkling with provocative outfits and provocative poses. At first, he tried to brush off this media noise, but his friends kept sending him news or photos of Haley basking in Trace's arms, smiling at the photographer's lenses. "She's not even hiding," some noted in conversations, tactfully falling silent at the sight of Evan's suffering face. He himself quickly plunged into depression. The days at work were painfully long, and the nights seemed endless. The worst thing was that he had no desire to trust anyone or ask for help. He moved away from his friends. His home was empty. He began to drink, justifying to himself that it would be easier to survive the pain. One evening, when it was already the dead of night outside, and Evan was sitting in an almost empty bar not far from the house, a familiar man sat down on a chair in front of him. It was Mark, one of Haley's colleagues, with whom they often crossed paths at office parties. Mark looked with sympathy at Evan's shabby appearance, at his reddened eyes and glass of cheap whiskey. "Hey, buddy, how did you end up here?" he asked, ordering a beer for himself. Evan just grinned joylessly. I'm drowning my grief." "What about you?" "I wanted to talk to you." Mark pulled his chair closer. I've wanted to for a long time, but I didn't know how to approach you. About what? Evan said indifferently. About that very night in the bar. Remember when you thought Haley left with a stranger? Evan clenched his cheekbones with a frown. Yes, I remember. This night was the beginning of the end. So, Mark took a sip from his glass, then continued, you shouldn't have blamed her then. She didn't cheat on you that night, and she didn't do anything wrong at all. We hung out with her almost until the morning. She was just very drunk, and when you couldn't see her, one guy actually took her out into the fresh air to make her feel better. Evan slowly turned his head to Mark, not believing his ears. What? Are you saying that there was nothing then? Exactly. Mark spread his hands. I don't know why you and Haley didn't tell each other the truth. Maybe she didn't remember everything in detail, but I see how you are suffering now, and I can't remain silent any longer. I wanted to say that Haley really just had too much that night. That guy's name was Zach. He was a friend of our colleague. He did not pester her, but only helped. Evan felt a storm of feelings rising inside him again, but now everything was mixed with relief. It turned out that his worst suspicions about that particular night were in vain, but it didn't matter much anymore because Haley had gone to Trace. This changes a lot, he said quietly. But her affair with Trace. Mark continued hesitantly. I heard that she openly demonstrates her relationship with him. Sorry for saying this directly. Evan exhaled, clenching his hands into fists. Did he feel better that Haley didn't commit the betrayal that night? Probably yes. But the facts showed that later she nevertheless crossed the line. And now he lives a completely different life, far from the one they dreamed of together. Thank you for saying that, Evan answered finally, feeling that his voice was failing him. It's a pity that everything turned out this way. Mark nodded understandingly. Yes, I'm sorry too. You deserve to know the truth, even if it doesn't give it back to you. They sat in silence for a little longer, each immersed in their own thoughts. Mark left early, patting Evan on the shoulder and telling him to hang in there. Evan remained at the bar, staring into the half-empty glass of whiskey that had suddenly lost its taste to him. He now knew that his accusations that night were unfounded. But Haley's real betrayal still happened, even if later and with another person. He couldn't understand why she chose Trace because of ambition, money, high position, or was she simply looking for something he couldn't give her? Returning home late at night, he could not sleep for a long time. Mental pain mixed with the remnants of alcohol and images of past happy days appeared before my eyes. He remembered their modest wedding, how he hugged her on their honeymoon, how she smiled at him for the first time after her transformation, being confident and loved. Several weeks have passed since that difficult conversation in which Evan and Haley finally broke up. These days dragged on for Evan joylessly and monotonously. He went to work, tried to distract himself, and in the evenings he returned home, where he was greeted only by silence and memories. All around was the coldness of empty rooms, illuminated by the dim light of a table lamp. Boxes of Haley's things still stood in the corner of the living room, like a silent reproach for everything that had happened. He tried to get out of depression, cut down on drinking, and sometimes called friends in order to somehow not stay within four walls. Sometimes they came to him, brought with them light snacks and a can of beer, and talked about trifles. Everyone understood perfectly well that Evan's soul was hurting, but no one dared to approach him with questions. Haley no longer appeared in his life personally, but he periodically saw photos of her on the internet and heard snippets of news from mutual friends. Apparently, she really spent a lot of time with Trace. They attended fashionable events and appeared in the gossip columns. At the same time, Evan noticed with pain that in Haley's eyes in these photos, there was no previous sincere radiance. Sometimes she smiled for photographers, but her gaze remained distant and empty. Another gray evening arrived, no different from the others, when suddenly there was a knock on the door. Evan flinched at the loud sound, unaccustomed to sudden guests, and slowly walked towards the front door. Opening it, he couldn't immediately believe his eyes. Haley was standing in front of him. She looked confused, although she stuck to her usual chic look, a coat made of expensive fabric, neat high-heeled shoes. Her lips were painted and her hair was styled impeccably. Nevertheless, Evan immediately noticed how her eyes faded, in which fatigue was visible. "Hi," she said quietly, biting her lip. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside to let her into the corridor. They stood so close that Evan could smell the familiar scent of her perfume. His heart sank. He closed the door and motioned for her to go into the living room. Haley looked at the boxes against the wall and pursed her lips for a moment, as if she wanted to say something. "Were you going to throw away my things?" she asked in a whisper. "No, I just folded them so I wouldn't see them all the time," he answered, looking down. "Why did you come?" She looked away as if it was hard for her to look at him. "I need a divorce." These 3 words echoed in the empty apartment. Until recently, she was his wife, and now she herself was talking about divorce. Evan was expecting something like this, but hearing it directly turned out to be much more painful than he expected. "Have you decided? So finally?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she answered, looking down. "Trace proposed to me, and I agreed." Evan clenched his fists, trying to calm the attack of bitterness and jealousy. He remembered how he had once knelt in front of her with a ring. Inside, everything was clenching from a feeling of betrayal, which he had already partially come to terms with, but now it returned with renewed vigor. "I understand," he squeezed out. "Well, if this is your choice." She slowly sank down onto the sofa, taking off her coat and placing it next to her. Evan noticed how tense her shoulders were. He sat down opposite her in the chair, trying not to meet her gaze. "I understand that after everything that happened, this sounds terrible," Haley continued, crumpling the hem of her dress in her hands. "But we haven't been together for a long time, and I can't pretend that everything is fine with us." Evan chuckled sadly. "You're not pretending, Haley. You chose your path a long time ago." She took a deep breath. "Yes, it's possible. I wanted things to be different. But now we need to go to the end." He looked at her for the first time that evening and noticed something in her face that contradicted her words, as if she herself did not fully believe that she would be happy with Trace. A slight tremor ran through Haley's lips when she again brought up the subject of the future wedding. "Trace is sure that." She began, but faltered, as if searching for words. "He thinks that we will be fine with him. He surrounded me with attention, opened doors to a world I could never have dreamed of. But sometimes—" She stopped short, apparently afraid to admit her weakness. Evan caught this moment and asked quietly, "Are you happy, Haley?" Her eyes darted to the side, and he managed to notice a glimmer of pain in them. "This is the best option for me," she said, as if convincing herself. "I just need more freedom, more opportunities, recognition. And Trace gives me all this." He sighed heavily, experiencing a contradictory feeling: pity for her, anger at her selfishness, and the remnant of his former love, which still clung to the image of the old Haley. The one who sat in front of him seemed both close and completely alien at the same time. "If you want a divorce, I won't interfere," he said, placing his hands on his knees. "There's no point in keeping someone who's already left anyway." Haley fought back her tears. "Thank you, Evan. And also, I would like to pick up my things." "Certainly. They're all here. You can pick it up right now." She took the box, awkwardly getting up from the couch. He helped her lift the second box, feeling his heart clench at the thought that they were now finally breaking all ties. Even these small, everyday things suddenly acquired a special weight. It seemed that part of his soul was leaving with them. As they stacked the boxes at the door, Haley stopped and turned to him. "I'm sorry. Sorry for everything." He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her face, in which he tried to find signs of relief or joy, but he saw only depression and confusion. "I don't want to live a lie anymore," she said quietly, turning away. "And if I was wrong about something, you should know that I never meant to cause you so much pain." Evan remained silent, feeling that all words seemed empty. He realized that she had already made her choice a long time ago, and no matter what she was now happy or unhappy, it was she who was responsible for the consequences. He raised his hand and touched her shoulder for a moment. She flinched as if she wanted to retreat, but froze. "I hope someday you will find what you are looking for," he said quietly, looking into her eyes. "If this turns out not to be the happiness you dreamed of." Haley pursed her lips and finally took her hand away, carefully pulling away. "I can't go back to the past, Evan. I'm not asking." At this point, they fell silent. She nodded at him, lowered her gaze, and picked up the box of things. He opened the door, and the cold air of the entrance rushed into the corridor. A few moments passed, and Haley crossed the threshold, taking with her the fragments of their life together. When the door slammed, Evan was unable to move immediately. There was an oppressive silence. It seemed even thicker than before. He involuntarily leaned against the wall, breathing deeply, as if after running a long distance. Consciousness repeated, "She is gone forever." But for some reason, there was no despair inside. It seemed that he had gone through a long path of pain and could no longer find the strength to cry or scream. He realized that perhaps he had made the only right choice, to let her go so that she could test her illusions in practice, and he had to learn to live on without trying to hold on to the past. It's been a few months since Evan gave Haley a divorce. For him, these days were a time of difficult changes, when he learned to live alone and find himself again. He tried to leave the house more, meet with friends, and look for a new hobby. But in the depths of his soul, the feeling of unspokenness did not leave him, as if not everything in their story was in place. One cold morning, he was scrolling through his news feed on the internet, trying to distract himself from another attack of melancholy. Suddenly, the news appeared on the screen. The wedding of eminent marketer Trace Holden and his beloved Haley will take place on Saturday at the country club. The article was accompanied by lush epithets, describing their bright romance and luxurious ceremony. Evan's heart sank painfully at the sight of Hallie's picture with her impeccable hairstyle and tight smile. "The wedding. She finally decided to do it," he whispered under his breath. A strange feeling rose in my chest, mixing despair with clumsy hope. After all, when she came for a divorce, he saw in her eyes that she was not at all as happy as she tried to seem. All week, while Evan tried to live a normal life, thoughts about the upcoming wedding haunted him. He knew he had to let Haley go, otherwise neither he nor she would ever find peace. But every time he imagined her in a wedding dress next to Trace, he felt like something was breaking inside. He would wake up at night in a cold sweat, wondering what he had lost and why his heart still held feelings for her. Saturday came quickly. Evan did not dare admit, even to himself, what thought he was harboring, namely, that he wanted to see her at this last moment. In the morning, he woke up before dawn and sat for several hours in an empty apartment, going through dozens of pros and cons. On the scales, he risks reopening old wounds, humiliating himself in front of people who already consider him part of the past. But on the other side of the scale lay the need for closure or a last-ditch attempt to make things right. When the clock showed 11:30, Evan suddenly stood up, as if pushed by an invisible force. He left the apartment, hailed a taxi, and told the driver the address of the country club, where, according to rumors, the magnificent ceremony was to take place. On the road, he looked at the fields and trees flashing outside the window and experienced a strange mixture of confusion and determination. He didn't fully know why he was going there, but something in him told him, "You have to at least try." The country club, immersed in the greenery of old fir trees and neatly trimmed lawns, was decorated with white ribbons and floral arrangements. Famous guests, dressed in the latest fashion, have already begun to gather. Soft classical music was playing everywhere, and lively conversation was taking place. Against the background of all this sophistication, Evan, in an ordinary jacket and dark trousers, looked almost invisible, and no one paid attention to him. He walked carefully towards the large building, not knowing where exactly to go. Seeing that chairs were arranged in the depths of the garden, and a priest and musicians were already standing at the makeshift altar, he realized that the ceremony was about to begin. People sat down on snow-white chairs, chatted to each other, and someone admired out loud that the wedding will be at the highest level. Evan froze in the shadow of the column, not daring to go closer. "Find out where the bride is," someone whispered behind him. It's time to start. Trace is already waiting. Trace stood at the altar in an impeccable suit, looking confident and imposing, glancing at his watch. Evan tensed, feeling a wave of rage and frustration welling up inside him. It seemed that everything around was breathing a world of luxury and ostentatious joy that was alien to him. Finally, the chords of the wedding march were heard, and Haley appeared on the path sprinkled with rose petals, arm in arm, with some relative as an escort. She wore a fluffy white dress that emphasized her figure and natural beauty, and a small tiara shone on her head. However, her face remained pale, and even from a distance, Evan noticed a trembling in her movements. The guests stood up and applauded. Haley walked forward, stopping next to Trace. He smiled, took her hand, and whispered something encouraging. The priest made a symbolic gesture, calling everyone to their seats, and began to speak the usual words about love, fidelity, and promises. Evan, standing a little to the side behind the bushes of blooming roses, swallowed the lump in his throat. He only now realized that he had gotten out here without a plan or words to say. But the sight of Haley standing next to this man seemed so wrong and painful to him that he suddenly felt a rush of adrenaline. It was as if some force inside pushed him to take a step forward. When it was the bride's turn to say words of agreement, Haley was silent for several seconds, as if gathering her courage. Trace was already beginning to move restlessly. The guests whispered to each other, surprised by her hesitation. And then Evan came out from behind the column and froze at the edge of the platform, catching her gaze. Everything began to spin, people began to turn around, trying to figure out who this uninvited guest was. Trace frowned, clearly recognizing Evan. But at that moment, everything stopped mattering because Haley was looking him straight in the eye. They looked at each other silently, without looking away, as if everyone else had ceased to exist at that moment. In her gaze one could read fear and confusion, but also a strange flash of joy. Evan couldn't say a word. His heart was pounding in his chest like crazy. It seemed to him that he was simply telling her with his eyes, "Don't do this, because you love me, not him." There was dead silence. Everyone froze in anticipation. The priest looked around in confusion, not understanding what was happening. Trace exhaled noisily, apparently intending to intervene, but never had time. Haley glanced around the guests and returned to Evan's eyes. She seemed to remember everything. The timid girl she once was, their first meeting, their tears, their love, and all their mistakes. And suddenly she realized that her heart still belonged to him. A quiet sorry escaped her lips, addressed to Trace, who looked at her in complete shock. Holding the hem of her dress, she turned sharply and, without waiting for the audience's reaction, ran back down the aisle, leaving behind confused guests and an angry groom. Rose petals flew at her feet, and her veil fluttered behind her like wings. Evan rushed towards her. They collided almost at the exit from the garden. He pressed her to him, and she clung to his shoulders, bursting into tears from relief and horror of what she had done. "I can't marry him," Haley breathed, haltingly cutting off each sentence. "I love you, Evan. I'm sorry for what I did. I was so confused." He didn't respond with words, only squeezed her tighter, feeling her trembling. He felt that his whole being was screaming about the desire to take her away, hide her from prying eyes and questions. And as if reading his thoughts, Haley herself said, "I'm sorry." And they left, almost running, leaving the club territory, ignoring the indignant screams and stunned looks. How they called a taxi, how they managed to emerge from this pathetic world, everything was left behind in some kind of foggy memory. Since then, Evan and Haley seemed to disappear from the radars of their acquaintances and society, settling somewhere far from large cities and social bustle. At first, they settled into a new life without phone calls or complicated explanations. Trace and his entourage apparently tried to find her, but Haley deliberately turned off all social networks and changed her phone number. They both needed time to heal their wounds, talk about everything, and finally start again. And only a couple of months later, their friends began to receive rare postcards and letters. One of these postcards featured a vibrant photograph of the Côte d'Azur, with Haley and Evan standing on the beach holding hands. The caption read, We decided to escape from the past and find our own place where we can be truly happy. According to friends, in this photo both looked relaxed and natural, without the same tension. Then several postcards arrived from different exotic countries. Someone received a photo of temples in Asia, someone received landscapes of Europe, and someone received a photo of stone beaches and lighthouses. Everywhere they wrote short messages full of humor and light romance. Today we tried local cuisine for the first time. It turned out to be spicy, but tasty. We are planning to arrange a small photo shoot in this quaint meadow, or simple happiness is holding the hand of a loved one when the ocean is raging around you. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.